I meant it as a joke when I called my daughter's art degree an expensive hobby. But Isadora didn't laugh. She just looked at me with eyes that had finally given up hoping I'd ever understand. That was the last time I saw her face, the day before her first gallery showing that I wasn't invited to. For decades, I've been Dr. Callista Vendrell, respected neuroscientist who can map the brain's complex pathways. Yet I failed to see what mattered to my own child. I pushed her towards science, belittled her passion, and treated her artistic talent like a phase she would outgrow. I never once truly looked at her work or tried to understand. I was so busy being brilliant in my world that I refused to see she was brilliant in hers. Now my daughter has vanished from my life, and I'm left wondering if some bridges once broken can ever be rebuilt. I met Isadora the way I meet everyone, with one eye on my phone. It was a Tuesday, and I was finishing a delicate bifrontal craniotomy when my phone buzzed in the pocket of my scrubs. I shouldn't have checked it, not with a patient's brain matter exposed beneath my gloved hands, but I always have. Dr. Vendrell, Dr. Samuel said, glancing up from the anesthesia monitor. Would you like to explain to our observing students what you're doing with the frontal lobe retraction? I straightened my back and addressed the gallery of residents watching from above. We're accessing the suprasellar region while minimizing frontal lobe retraction, I said, voice carrying through my surgical mask. Notice how I'm maintaining the critical vascular structures while isolating the tumor margin. The residents leaned forward in unison, their faces masks of concentration. They reminded me of myself 30 years ago, though I'd never had the luxury of this kind of direct observation. When I was training, women in neurosurgery were still oddities, particularly Afro-Latina women like myself. My phone buzzed again. This time I ignored it. My surgical nurse slid a suction tube precisely where I needed it without my having to ask. We'd been working together so long she could anticipate my movements. I often wished my daughter had that same intuition about what I needed. 90 minutes later, with the patient stable and the tumor successfully removed, I finally checked my messages. Isadora had texted, "Coming by at 7 to show you something important. Please be home." The please worried me. Isadora didn't usually ask for my time so formally. At 22, she was more likely to simply appear at my condo with whatever crisis needed solving. "Successful procedure, Dr. Vendrell," said Dr. Liu, one of the younger neurosurgeons on staff. "Your daughter must be so proud to follow in your footsteps at the university." I'd never bothered to correct the assumption among my colleagues that Isadora was in the medical school, or at least studying neuroscience. It was simpler to let them believe she'd followed my path than explain that my only child had chosen to spend 4 years and a small fortune studying how to splash paint on canvas. "We're all very proud of her work," I said, not quite a lie. I checked my watch. It was nearly 6, and if Isadora was coming at 7, I'd need to leave immediately to beat the Cambridge traffic. I'd have to finish my notes remotely. "Dr. Parker," I called to one of the residents, "I expect the post-op report on my desk by morning. Full metabolic panel, neurological assessment every hour for the first 6. The young woman nodded eagerly. I didn't look back as I left. At home, I had just enough time to change out of my scrubs and heat up some leftover soup when the doorbell rang at precisely 7:00 p.m. Isadora had her father's punctuality, if little else, from him. When I opened the door, she was struggling to maneuver a large canvas wrapped in cloth through the entryway. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, her jeans splattered with what I hoped was paint. "Let me help you," I said, reaching for the canvas. "I've got it." Her voice held an edge. "Just need to get it through the door." My condo was minimalist by design, with clean white walls and sparse furniture. I'd never understood the need to clutter living spaces with unnecessary decorations. The large canvas Isadora brought looked immediately out of place, like a wild animal in a surgical suite. "I brought wine," I said, gesturing toward the kitchen counter where I'd opened a bottle of Pinot Noir. "Your favorite." Isadora glanced at the bottle and gave a tight smile. "You remembered." "Of course I did," I said, though we both knew I'd had my assistant note her preferences years ago. I hadn't acquired my position by trusting my memory for details that could be systematically recorded. She propped the canvas against the wall and poured herself a glass of wine, taking a long sip before facing me. "So," I said, looking at the cloth-covered painting. "Is that what you wanted to show me?" Isadora nodded, setting down her glass. She straightened her shoulders the way she did before piano recitals as a child. "It's my senior thesis project. It won the Hayden Prize." I vaguely recalled the Hayden Prize was something given to art students, though I couldn't remember its significance. "Congratulations," I said, matching her formal tone. She pulled away the cloth covering. The canvas was enormous, maybe 5 feet square, and covered in swirling patterns of pink. Not just one pink, but dozens of shades, from nearly white to almost red, flowing across the canvas in layered spirals. There were other colors too, buried beneath or slicing through the pink. Bits of gold, streaks of deep blue, splashes of something almost orange. I had no idea what I was looking at. "It's called maternal memory," Isadora said, her voice steady but tense. "It's part of a series I'm doing on neurological impressions of early childhood experiences." I stepped closer, looking for something familiar, something I could connect to. It just looked like swirls to me, pretty perhaps, but without structure or meaning. "It's very pink," I said finally. Isadora's face fell for just a moment before she recovered. "I used fMRI scans as inspiration for the movement patterns. The pink represents the limbic activation during maternal bonding. That caught my attention." "You used actual brain scans?" "I worked with Dr. Levinson in the psychology department. She let me observe some of her attachment studies." I felt a spark of interest. "That's actually quite clever, using scientific data as a foundation." I moved closer to the painting. "Did you correlate the color intensity with activation levels?" "Mom," Isadora said, her voice tight, "it's not a data visualization. It's art inspired by science, not a graph." I stepped back, realizing I'd missed the point again. "Of course. It's very expressive." Isadora watched me, waiting for more. When I offered nothing, she said, "Professor Levinson thinks I should apply to the MFA program at RISD. She says my integration of neuroscience and artistic expression is unique." I took a sip of my wine to hide my reaction. More school, more tuition, more delaying a real career. "The Hayden Prize includes a small show at the Barker Gallery next month," she continued. "This piece will be the centerpiece." "A show," I repeated. "That's wonderful. Professor Levinson says it could lead to representation if the right people see it." I had no idea what representation meant in this context, but I could tell from Isadora's tone that it was significant. "It sounds like you've impressed your professors," I said carefully. "I have," she said. There was a challenge in her voice now. "I'm good at this, Mom, really good." "I'm sure you are," I said automatically. She stared at me, her dark eyes so like my own. "No, you're not sure. You've never been sure about anything I've done that wasn't science." I set down my wine glass, feeling the conversation shift into dangerous territory. "That's not fair, Isadora. I've supported your interests." "You've tolerated them," she corrected. "There's a difference." "I paid for 4 years at one of the most expensive arts programs in the country," I pointed out. "I think that demonstrates considerable support." As soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. Isadora's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "Yes, you paid," she said quietly. "You never let me forget that part." I tried to backtrack. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant." She turned to look at her painting, then back at me. "What do you really think when you look at this, Mom? Not what you think you should say. What do you actually think?" I looked at the canvas again, trying to see what she saw in it. But all I could think about was the tuition bills, the impractical career path, the instability of an artist's life. "So this is what $160,000 of college looks like," I said, and I laughed. I meant it as a joke. A poor one born of frustration and worry. But Isadora didn't laugh. She went completely still, the way prey animals do when they sense a predator. Her face smoothed out, emotion draining away like blood from a surgical field. "And there it is," she said, her voice so soft I almost couldn't hear it. "After 4 years, that's still all you see." "Isadora, I didn't mean—" "You never mean it," she cut me off. You never mean to dismiss everything I care about. You never mean to make me feel like I'm wasting my life. You never mean to compare me to your residence or the daughter you wish you had." She was wrapping the cloth back around her painting as she spoke, her movements quick and precise. "That's not fair," I said, but the protest sounded hollow even to me. "You know what's not fair?" She hoisted the canvas under her arm. "I keep hoping someday you'll actually see me, not the daughter you wanted, but the one you have." "Where are you going?" I asked, alarmed by the finality in her tone. "To prepare for my show," she said. "The one you won't be invited to." "Don't be dramatic," I said. "I'll come to your show." Isadora paused at the door, looking back at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much older than 22. "No, you won't," she said. "Because I don't want you there. I'm done trying to make you proud of something you'll never understand." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. I stood in my pristine living room, wineglass in hand, telling myself she was overreacting. She'd cool down and call tomorrow. We'd had disagreements before. Except this hadn't felt like our usual arguments. There had been something different in her eyes, not hurt or anger, but a kind of conclusion reached. I finished my wine and went back to my case notes. I had surgeries scheduled for the next 3 days. Isadora knew my schedule was demanding. She knew not to expect daily check-ins. By the time she called again, this would be forgotten. I was wrong. She didn't call the next day, or the day after that. When a week had passed, I tried calling her, but the call went straight to voicemail. I left a message that sounded more clinical than maternal. "Isadora, it's your mother. Call me back when you get this." She didn't. 2 weeks after our argument, I ran into Dr. Levinson at a faculty event. I'd avoided her for years, finding her soft science approach to psychology irritating, but now I made my way directly to her. "Dr. Levinson," I said, with a smile that felt stretched across my face. "I understand you've been working with my daughter." She looked surprised to see me addressing her. "Yes, Isadora is remarkable. Her show next month is already generating buzz in the local arts community." "Her show," I repeated. "At the Barker Gallery." Dr. Levinson tilted her head. "Oh no, that was just going to be a small student showcase. After she won the Hayden, the Morrison Gallery downtown offered her a solo exhibition. Didn't she tell you? It's quite an honor for an undergraduate." I maintained my smile through force of will. She must have forgotten to mention it. You know how scattered artists can be. Dr. Levinson's pleasant expression cooled. "Actually, Isadora is one of the most organized and methodical students I've ever worked with. Her approach to integrating neuroscientific principles with visual expression is remarkably disciplined." I excused myself before she could say more, retreating to the bar where I ordered a Scotch neat. As I drank, I scrolled through my phone to find the last message from Isadora, sent the morning before she'd come to my condo, "Coming by at 7 to show you something important. Please be home." Thought she was coming to show me a painting. But looking back, I realized she'd been coming to tell me about her gallery show, her first real professional achievement. She wanted to share her success with me, and I'd laughed at it. I tried calling her again that night, and the next. My calls continued to go to voicemail until, in the third week, an automated message informed me the number was no longer in service. That was when I began to understand that Isadora hadn't merely been angry with me. She had decided to remove me from her life entirely. The human brain is remarkably adaptable. When faced with injury or trauma, it reroutes neural pathways, finding new connections to replace the damaged ones. I've spent my career studying this neuroplasticity, yet I failed to apply the same principle to my personal life. When Isadora cut herself out of my brain, I simply worked around the wound. I doubled my hours at the lab. I accepted speaking engagements I would normally decline. I volunteered to cover surgeries during the Thanksgiving holiday when Isadora and I would typically have our annual awkward dinner at my condo. If colleagues noticed my intensified work ethic, they attributed it to my characteristic dedication, not avoidance. "Dr. Vendrell, the research committee needs your final approval on the grant proposal," my assistant said one morning in early December, sliding a folder across my desk. I glanced up from my computer where I'd been reviewing MRI scans for 6 straight hours. "It's not due until next week." Yes, but Dr. Kapoor mentioned you might want to review the funding allocation before finalizing. Something about the equipment budget for the hippocampal study. I nodded, taking the folder. Tell him I'll have it back by tomorrow. My assistant hesitated, hovering near my desk with that particular look assistants get when they have something to say but aren't sure they should say it. What is it, Myra? I asked, not looking up as I flipped through the grant proposal. I was just wondering if you'd heard from Isadora lately, about her show. The name sent a jolt through me that I carefully kept from showing on my face. What show? Mira looked surprised. The gallery exhibition. My niece is taking classes at the Art Institute and mentioned it. I thought maybe Isadora would have told you. I set down the folder with deliberate calm. I've been quite busy lately. We haven't spoken as frequently as usual. Mira, who had worked with me for 6 years and knew my communication style, simply nodded. Well, it sounds impressive for someone just out of school. The Morrison Gallery is quite selective. I waited until she left before opening my browser and typing Isadora Vendrell Morrison Gallery into the search bar. The results loaded instantly. A sleek web page for the gallery featuring a familiar swirl of pinks and blues. Introducing Isadora Vendrell, Invisible Daughters, the headline read. December 15th, January 30th. The exhibition was opening in just 10 days. I stared at the image, recognizing it as a cropped portion of the painting she'd shown me that night in my condo. Below it was a brief artist's statement, exploring the neurological patterns of maternal bonds and their absences. Vendrell's work examines the science of connection through an intimate lens of personal experience. Her debut collection asks, what shapes remain when the expected forms of love are removed? I closed the browser window as if it had burned me. Then, after a moment, I opened it again and printed the page. That evening, I drove past Isadora's apartment building on my way home. Her light was on, a soft glow from the third-floor window. I slowed my car, considering whether to stop, wondering what I would say if I did. In the end, I drove on. I had no language for this situation. All my carefully calibrated words seemed useless here. 2 days later, I received an envelope in my faculty mailbox. Inside was a formal invitation to a department holiday party at the home of Dr. Nathan Levinson and Dr. Sonia Levinson. I typically avoided these social functions, but Sonia Levinson was Isadora's mentor, the psychology professor who'd allowed her to study the brain scans. Perhaps she would have information about my daughter. The Levinsons lived in a renovated Victorian in Cambridge, the kind of home filled with books and mismatched furniture that nonetheless looked deliberately curated. When I arrived, the party was already in full swing, faculty members from various departments clustered in animated conversation groups, holiday music playing softly beneath the din of academic debate. Sonia Levinson spotted me as I hung my coat and approached with 2 glasses of wine. Callista, I'm so glad you could make it. Nathan was certain you wouldn't come. I accepted the wine with a polite smile. I thought it was time I participated in more departmental socializing. She arched an eyebrow but didn't challenge the obvious lie. Well, we're delighted you're here. There are some people from the arts faculty I'd love to introduce you to. I followed her through the crowded living room, nodding at familiar faces until we reached a small group near the fireplace. Everyone, this is Dr. Callista Vendrell from Neuroscience, Sonia said. Callista, this is Marcus Chen, Chair of Visual Arts, and Emma Rodriguez, who runs the student gallery. Marcus Chen shook my hand with enthusiasm. Dr. Vendrell, what a pleasure. Your daughter is causing quite a stir in our department. We're all very excited about her Morrison debut. I managed a smile. Yes, it's quite an achievement. The integration of neuroscience into her work is fascinating, Emma Rodriguez added. She mentioned your research was an influence. Will you be speaking at the opening? I took a large sip of wine. Speaking. Sometimes family members of the artist give remarks, especially when there's such a clear connection to the work, she explained. But perhaps that's not finalized yet. I'm sure Isadora will make those decisions as she sees fit, I said, my voice tight. Sonia gave me a curious look before smoothly changing the subject. Marcus was just telling us about the new media lab they're installing in the spring semester. I listened without hearing as Marcus described the technology upgrades to their department, nodding at appropriate intervals while my mind raced. These people knew more about my daughter's life than I did. They spoke of her work with understanding and admiration. They expected me to be part of her opening. "Excuse me," I said abruptly when there was a pause in the conversation. "I need to refill my drink." In the kitchen, I set my half-full glass on the counter and gripped the edge of the sink, breathing deeply. This was ridiculous. I was a respected neurosurgeon, a department head, a researcher with multiple published papers. I didn't get flustered at cocktail parties because people mentioned my daughter, Dr. Vendrell. I turned to find a young woman with short dark hair watching me with concern. She looked vaguely familiar. "I'm Ava Tors," she said. "I was in your introductory neuroscience class 3 years ago. I'm in the MFA program now." I straightened, professional mode engaging automatically. "Ms. Tors, how nice to see you. I just wanted to tell you how much your lectures on neural mapping influenced my thesis work," she said, "and to say that Isidora's been an amazing mentor to the first-year students. Her color theory workshop changed my whole approach." I blinked at her. "Isidora teaches workshops?" Ava nodded enthusiastically. "She's been the graduate assistant for Professor Chen's color theory course this semester. We're all hoping she accepts the RISD offer so she stays somewhat local for her master's." "RISD," I repeated. "Rhode Island School of Design." "Yes, though she's had offers from programs in New York and Chicago too," Ava continued, oblivious to my growing discomfort. "After the Morrison show, she'll probably have her pick of programs." I excused myself, retrieved my coat, and left without saying goodbye to the hosts. In my car, I sat with the engine running, heat blasting against the December cold, while a strange pressure built behind my eyes. Isidora was teaching. She had multiple graduate school offers. She was preparing for a significant exhibition, and I knew none of it. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel the loss. Not just the day-to-day absence of occasional texts or monthly dinners, but the larger absence of knowing who my daughter had become. 3 days before Isidora's exhibition opening, I received a large envelope in my departmental mailbox. Inside was a glossy catalog for the Morrison Gallery show, featuring Isidora's swirling pinks on the cover. I flipped through it at my desk, studying the photographs of paintings I'd never seen, reading the curator's introduction that praised Isidora's bold exploration of neuroscience through an emotionally resonant visual language. The final page listed acknowledgments. Isidora thanked her professors, her fellow students, the gallery staff, and Dr. Sonia Levinson for opening doors to both scientific inquiry and artistic expression. My name was conspicuously absent. I closed the catalog and looked at the framed photographs on my desk. Isidora at her high school graduation, looking solemn in her cap and gown. Isidora at age 10 holding a science fair trophy. Isidora as a toddler sitting in my lap while I read a medical journal. The most recent was nearly 5 years old. That evening, I did something I rarely allowed myself. I opened the box of family photos I kept in the back of my closet. Among the carefully organized albums was one labeled simply Isidora Art. I'd forgotten its existence until that moment. Inside were drawings and paintings from throughout her childhood, finger paintings from preschool, carefully colored mandalas from elementary school, increasingly sophisticated sketches from her teen years. I had saved them all, even as I'd steered her towards science fairs and math competitions. One drawing caught my attention, a portrait she'd done of me when she was about 16. In it, I was sitting at my desk, looking at something out of frame, my face in profile. The detail was remarkable, down to the small scar near my left eyebrow from a childhood fall. But what struck me most was how she'd captured my expression, intent, focused, distant. Was that how she had always seen me? The night of the exhibition opening, I sat in my car across the street from the Morrison Gallery, watching people arrive in their carefully curated casual but sophisticated attire. Through the large windows, I could see the bright white walls adorned with splashes of color Isidora's work. I could see her too, moving through the crowd in a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, stopping to speak with various guests. I had no right to be there. She had made that clear. And yet I couldn't bring myself to drive away. A tap on my window startled me. Sonia Levinson stood beside my car, wrapped in a wool coat, her breath visible in the cold air. I rolled down the window. "Are you coming in or just conducting surveillance?" she asked, her tone gentle despite the pointed question. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. "She doesn't want me there." Sonia considered this. "Did she tell you that specifically?" "The last time we spoke, she said I wouldn't be invited to her show because she didn't want me there." "That was months ago, Callista. People say things in anger." I looked across at the gallery, where Isadora was now standing next to one of her paintings, gesturing as she spoke to an older man in an expensive-looking suit. "I don't know how to enter that room," I admitted, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. I didn't admit ignorance. Ever. Sonia studied me for a moment. "You know, I've worked with Isadora for over 2 years now. Do you want to know what I've learned about her?" I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. "She's brilliant, methodical, and incredibly hardworking. She holds herself to impossibly high standards and takes criticism personally but never shows it. She builds walls to protect herself from disappointment." Sonia leaned closer to the window. "Sound familiar?" The observation struck me with physical force. I'd always seen Isadora as her father's daughter, emotional, impulsive, drawn to the abstract rather than the concrete. But Sonia was right. In the ways that mattered in the structure of her character, Isadora was unmistakably my daughter. "The entire show is about mother-daughter relationships," Sonia continued. "Specifically about your relationship. She's been working on it for over a year." I swallowed hard. "I didn't know." "No," Sonia agreed. "You didn't." She straightened up and buttoned her coat. "I'm going back inside. It's your choice whether you join us." I watched her cross the street and enter the gallery. Through the window, I saw her approach Isadora, whisper something in her ear. Isadora glanced toward the window, toward my car, though I knew she couldn't see me in the darkness. For a moment I thought she might come outside. But then someone else claimed her attention and she turned away. I started the car and drove home, the catalog from her show sitting on the passenger seat like an accusation. That night, unable to sleep, I opened my laptop and searched for Isadora's name. The exhibition had already generated several reviews. The Boston Arts Chronicle called her work a stunning debut from a significant new voice. The university paper declared her an alum to watch. A prominent art blog praised her unique synthesis of scientific precision and emotional depth. I read every article, every mention of her name, hungrily gathering these crumbs of knowledge about my daughter's life. In one interview, she was asked about her influences. "I grew up surrounded by science," she was quoted saying. "My mother is a neurosurgeon, so the language of the brain was my first language in many ways. Even when I chose art over science, I never saw them as separate worlds. To me, they're different methods of inquiry into the same fundamental questions." I read the quote again and again. There was no bitterness in her words, no rejection of the scientific world I'd raised her in. Instead, she had found a way to integrate it into her own path. The next morning, I searched her name again and found new photos from the opening. In one, Isadora stood beside her centerpiece, the pink swirling painting she'd brought to my condo, now flanked by 2 additional canvases to form a triptych titled The Last Conversation. The paintings on either side echoed the central piece but with crucial differences. One was dominated by cool blues and rigid geometric patterns, the other by warm golds and fluid forms. Even I could see the symbolism. The analytical mother, the artistic daughter, the conversation between them or the lack thereof. The following week, my department celebrated securing a major research grant. At the champagne toast, the dean raised his glass to me. "To Dr. Vendrell, whose groundbreaking work on neural regeneration continues to advance our understanding of the brain's remarkable capacity for change." Everyone applauded. I smiled and nodded, but inside a quiet voice was asking, If the brain can forge new pathways after injury, why couldn't I? That evening, when Dr. Kapoor stopped by my office to discuss the upcoming research schedule, he noticed the exhibition catalog on my desk. "I didn't know you were interested in contemporary art, Callista," he said, picking it up. "It's my daughter's work," I said. The words felt strange in my mouth, a combination of pride and loss. He flipped through the catalog with genuine interest. "This is remarkable. The neural patterns are clearly informed by actual brain mapping. Is she in neuroscience as well?" "No," I said. "She's an artist, a very good one apparently." Dr. Kapoor looked up, surprised by something in my tone. "You didn't know?" I considered lying, maintaining the facade I'd constructed for so long, but I was tired of pretending. "I knew she was studying art," I said carefully. "I didn't know she was good at it. I never really looked." Dr. Kapoor, a man with 4 children of his own, all following his path into medicine, set the catalog down and regarded me with unexpected gentleness. "That's the thing about children," he said. "Sometimes we're so busy looking for what we recognize in them that we miss who they actually are." After he left, I picked up my phone and dialed Isidora's disconnected number one more time, listening to the automated message tell me what I already knew. She was unreachable. I decided to go to the Morrison Gallery on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after the opening. The crowds would be thinner, and I could view Isidora's work without the social performance of an exhibition event. I wore my usual work attire, a charcoal pantsuit and sensible heels, as if I were attending a medical conference rather than an art gallery. A young woman with purple-tipped hair sat at the front desk, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when I entered, offering a practiced smile. "Welcome to Morrison Gallery. Are you here for the Vendrell exhibition?" Hearing my own surname applied to Isidora's work gave me a strange feeling, a mix of pride and disconnection. "Yes," I said, "I am. It's been our most popular show this season," she said, handing me a slim brochure. "If you have any questions about the artwork or pricing, just let me know." Pricing. It hadn't occurred to me that people would be buying Isidora's paintings. That strangers might hang her work in their homes, look at it daily, appreciate it in ways I never had. "Thank you," I said, taking the brochure. The gallery was larger than it appeared from outside, with several interconnected rooms branching off a central space. Isidora's work filled all of it. I moved slowly through the exhibition, forcing myself to truly look at each piece, to consider it not as my daughter's hobby, but as a serious artistic statement. The earlier paintings were more literal, brain-like structures rendered in vibrant colors, neural pathways depicted with thick, textured brushstrokes. As I moved deeper into the gallery, the work became more abstract, the scientific references more subtle, until I reached the centerpiece, the triptych titled "The Last Conversation." I stood before it for a long time. From a distance, the 3 canvases seemed to flow together, a conversation between cool blues and warm golds mediated by the central panel of pinks. But as I moved closer, I noticed details I'd missed when Isidora brought the center panel to my condo. Embedded in the swirling pinks were tiny words, almost hidden in the paint, fragments of conversations between us. I had to lean in close to read them. "You'll understand when you're older. This is for your own good. The real world doesn't reward dreamers. Your potential is being wasted." My own words stared back at me from the canvas, preserved in paint like insects in amber. And among them, fainter but still visible, "Please see me, please see me, please see me." I stepped back, a physical recoil from the emotional impact. The painting wasn't just about our relationship. It was a record of it, a meticulous documentation of every dismissal, every misunderstanding, every moment I'd failed to see who she truly was. "It's powerful, isn't it?" I turned to find a man about my age standing beside me, admiring the triptych. He had the casual confidence of someone comfortable in the art world, with fashionably messy gray hair and expensive-looking glasses. "Yes," I managed. "Very powerful. The integration of text is what makes it exceptional," he continued. "Most young artists working with neuroscience imagery stay surface level, but Vendrell goes deeper, making the scientific personal. I've been following her work since her student showcase last year. Last year, another exhibition I hadn't known about. Are you familiar with her other work? He asked. Not as familiar as I should be, I admitted. He nodded toward a smaller painting across the room. That one over there sold on opening night for $12,000. I tried to buy it myself, but a collector from New York beat me to it. $12,000 for one painting by my daughter. Have you met the artist? He asked. She's remarkably articulate about her process. I know her, I said, the understatement making my chest tight. What did she say about her process? She talked about how she maps emotional memories neurologically before translating them visually, he said. Something about encoding experiences through both analytical and artistic lenses simultaneously. Fascinating approach. I nodded, unable to form a response. This stranger knew more about my daughter's creative process than I did. Well, enjoy the rest of the show, he said, moving toward another painting. I continued through the gallery, studying each work with new eyes. In one room, a series of smaller paintings depicted neural networks dissolving into abstract patterns. The placard beside them read, "Maternal Expectations, Studies in Disappointment." The final room contained the most recent works completed just before the exhibition. These were different, more hopeful, less raw. One in particular caught my attention, a large canvas where the harsh divisions between blue and gold had begun to blur, creating new colors in the spaces between. It was titled simply Possibility. I was staring at it, lost in thought, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Mom. I turned to find Isadora standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of surprise and wariness. She looked different somehow, more confident, more adult than the last time I'd seen her. Or perhaps I was simply seeing her clearly for the first time. Isadora, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Your work is extraordinary. She didn't move closer. What are you doing here? I wanted to see your exhibition, I said, to really see it. Why now? The question was fair. I could have come weeks ago. I could have been there on opening night. I could have been seeing her work for years. Because I was wrong, I said, the admission foreign on my tongue. About your art, about what I said that night. She crossed her arms, defensive. Which part? All of it, I said. I looked at your painting, but I didn't see it. I didn't try to understand what it meant to you or why it mattered. She was silent for a long moment, studying me the way she might examine a canvas, looking for what lay beneath the surface. You're right, she finally said. You didn't. A young couple entered the room then, glancing curiously between us before focusing on the paintings. Isadora straightened, her face shifting into what I recognized as her public expression, the same mask I wore during difficult consultations. If you'll excuse me, she said formally, I have a meeting with the gallery director about extending the exhibition. Of course, I said, matching her tone. Congratulations on your success. She nodded once, then turned to leave, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. I watched her go, the distance between us feeling both literal and metaphorical. The young couple moved to stand beside me, admiring Possibility. I love how the colors blend here, the woman said. It feels like a conversation starting to happen. I looked at the painting again. She was right. It wasn't a resolution, but a beginning, colors reaching toward each other across the canvas. I left the gallery with the exhibition catalog and a new understanding. Isadora hadn't just disconnected from me. She had channeled our fractured relationship into her art. She had taken our pain and transformed it into something meaningful, something that moved strangers to tears and opened their wallets. She had done what artists do, and I had failed to value it. Outside, the January air was sharp with cold. I checked my phone out of habit, finding 3 missed calls from the hospital. A surgical consult, a department meeting, a research update, all demanding my immediate attention. For the first time in my career, I ignored them all and sat on a bench across from the gallery, watching people come and go. Some left the exhibition visibly moved, pausing on the sidewalk to collect themselves. Others emerged animated, gesturing as they discussed what they'd seen with companions. All of them had been affected by Isadora's work in ways I never allowed myself to be. I was still sitting there when Isadora emerged an hour later, wrapping a scarf around her neck against the cold. She spotted me immediately, her steps faltering briefly before she crossed the street to where I sat. Are you still here? She asked, her breath visible in the frigid air. I needed to think, I said. She hesitated, then sat beside me on the bench, leaving careful space between us. We sat in silence for a moment, watching traffic pass. The man with the gray hair, I finally said. He told me your smaller painting sold for $12,000. A small smile touched her lips. 15, actually, he's a terrible gossip. $15,000, I repeated. For one painting. Does that validate it for you? She asked, a sharp edge to her voice. Now that you know people will pay for it, is my art real? The question stung because it contained truth. I had always measured value in quantifiable terms: publications, grants, surgical success rates. Even now, I was focusing on the monetary aspect of her achievement. No, I said honestly. What makes it real is how it affected me. I saw myself in your work today, Isadora. Not the self I present to the world, but the mother I've been to you. It wasn't a flattering portrait. She looked down at her hands, gloved against the cold. It wasn't meant to be cruel. I know, I said. It was meant to be true. Another silence fell between us, less tense than before. Why didn't you ever come to my student shows? She asked suddenly. Before all this happened between us, I invited you every time. The question caught me off guard with its simplicity. Why hadn't I gone? I'd always had reasonable excuses: surgeries scheduled, papers to review, conferences to attend. But the truth was simpler and more damning. I didn't think they mattered, I said. I thought they were just practice for a real career later. I was wrong. She nodded, absorbing this. You know what's ironic? I spent 4 years studying art and you spent 30 studying the brain, but you never once asked me about the connection between them. About why I find neuroscience fascinating even though I don't want to practice it. Tell me now, I said. She looked surprised, then thoughtful. The brain constructs our reality based on incomplete information. It fills in gaps, makes assumptions, creates a coherent story from fragments. Art does the same thing. It's about perception, interpretation, the space between what we see and what we understand. She gestured toward the gallery. My work explores that intersection. I listened, truly listened, to her articulate the connection between our worlds in a way I'd never considered. She spoke with the same precision I used when explaining complicated procedures, the same clarity of thought I valued in my research. I should have asked a long time ago, I said when she finished. Yes, she agreed. You should have. A gust of wind swept down the street, carrying a few dry snowflakes. Isadora pulled her coat tighter around herself. I should go, she said. I'm meeting friends for dinner. I nodded, trying to hide my disappointment. Of course. She stood, adjusting her scarf. The exhibition runs for 2 more weeks. There's an artist talk on Saturday afternoon if you're interested. It was the barest of invitations, offered with careful neutrality. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but a small door left ajar. I'd like that, I said. She nodded once, then walked away, her figure growing smaller as she moved down the street. I remained on the bench until the cold became uncomfortable, thinking about neural pathways and the effort required to create new ones. About how the brain resists change, how it prefers familiar patterns even when they're no longer useful. About the patience needed to form new connections. The next morning, I cleared my schedule for Saturday afternoon. When my department chair questioned the change, I said simply, I'm attending my daughter's artist talk. He looked surprised. I never modified my schedule for personal reasons, but nodded. I've heard good things about her exhibition. The neuroscience connection is innovative. Yes, I agreed, feeling a faint but unmistakable pride. It is. Saturday arrived with a light snowfall that dusted Boston in white. I arrived at the gallery 30 minutes early, dressed more carefully than usual in a deep blue suit that Isadora had once complimented. The gallery was already filling with people, folding chairs arranged in rows before the triptych. The young woman with purple-tipped hair recognized me from my previous visit. You're back, she said. Are you here for the artist talk? Yes, I replied. Is there a reserved seating area? Only for family, she said, checking a list. What's your name? I hesitated. Dr. Callista Vendrell. I'm Isadora's mother. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh yes, you're on the list. Front row, center section. I was on the list. Isadora had anticipated my acceptance of her invitation, had reserved a seat for me despite our strained conversation. As I took my seat, I noticed Sonia Levinson watching me from across the room. She gave me a small nod of acknowledgement, which I returned. Around me, people chatted excitedly about Isadora's work, some clutching catalogs for signing, others debating the merits of different pieces. At precisely 2 o'clock, the gallery director stepped to the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming to this special artist talk with Isadora Vendrell," she said. "We've been overwhelmed by the response to this exhibition, which has broken attendance records for a debut show at Morrison Gallery. Please join me in welcoming Isadora." Applause filled the room as Isadora walked to the front, dressed in a simple black dress with a structured jacket. She looked poised, professional, completely at ease before the crowd. I felt a surprising surge of maternal pride, recognizing my own confidence in her bearing. She thanked the gallery, her professors, her fellow artists. Then her eyes found mine in the front row. "I'd also like to thank my mother, Dr. Callista Vendrell," she said, her voice steady. "Her work in neuroscience has influenced my artistic approach in ways I'm still discovering." The unexpected acknowledgement left me momentarily breathless. I managed a small nod, aware of curious glances from those seated near me. For the next hour, Isadora spoke eloquently about her work, the intersection of science and art, her process and influences. She fielded questions with grace and humor, demonstrating a command of both artistic concepts and neurological principles. As I listened, I saw her through new eyes, not as my daughter who had chosen a different path, but as a brilliant young woman who had forged her own way, drawing from but not limited by my influence. When the talk ended and people lined up to speak with her individually, I remained seated, unsure of my place in this world she had created without me. But as the crowd thinned, Isadora glanced over at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an invitation to approach. I stood and walked toward her, conscious of the eyes of her artistic peers upon us, of the gap that still existed between us, of the difficult road ahead if we were to rebuild what had been broken. "That was an impressive presentation," I said when I reached her. "Thank you," she said. "I'm glad you could come." "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied, the words an apology for all the times I had. The gallery director approached then, excusing herself for the interruption. "Isadora, the collector from Chicago, is eager to speak with you about commissioning a piece." Isadora nodded. "I'll be right there." When the director stepped away, she turned back to me. "I need to handle this." "Of course," I said. "You're in demand." A small smile touched her lips. Apparently, I should have left then, should have given her space to enjoy her professional success without the complication of our relationship. But I needed to say one more thing. "Isadora," I said, my voice lower. "What you've created here is remarkable. Not because it sold or because critics praised it, but because it's truthful. It's important. I was wrong not to see that sooner." She studied me for a long moment, her expression guarded but not cold. "That means more than you know," she finally said. "But we have a lot to talk about if we're going to move forward." "I know," I agreed. "I'm ready when you are," she nodded, then glanced toward the waiting collector. "I need to go, but maybe we could have coffee next week." "Tuesday afternoon?" "Tuesday would be perfect," I said, careful not to show too much emotion, not to overwhelm this fragile new connection with the weight of my regret. As I left the gallery, walking into the snowy afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not for an immediate reconciliation or a simple resolution, but for the possibility of a new conversation. A different kind of connection. Like the brain forming new neural pathways after injury, it would take time, repetition, conscious effort. There would be setbacks and frustrations. The old patterns would not disappear overnight, but as Isadora's painting had suggested, there was possibility in the spaces between us. And for the first time, I was ready to explore it. Our Tuesday coffee turned into a weekly routine. We started at a neutral location, a cafe equidistant between the medical center and Isadora's studio, meeting for exactly 1 hour each week. The first few encounters were stilted, filled with careful small talk and deliberate avoidance of difficult topics. We discussed the weather, the cafe's pastry selection, innocuous campus news. I treated these meetings with the same structured approach I applied to difficult patient consultations. Maintain professional demeanor, avoid emotional reactivity, focus on concrete outcomes. Isadora seemed to take a similar approach, arriving precisely on time, dressed with careful casualness, offering me polite smiles that never quite reached her eyes. We were two people performing reconciliation without actually doing the work it required. During our fourth meeting, as we sat across from each other barely touching our cooling coffees, Isadora suddenly set down her cup with unmistakable frustration. "This isn't working," she said. My heart sank. "I understand if you don't want to continue these meetings. That's not what I mean," she said. "I mean this performance we're doing, acting like strangers making small talk. Neither of us is being real." I straightened my spine automatically, my default response to criticism. "I'm trying to respect your boundaries." "I know," she sighed, "and I appreciate that, but we're never going to get anywhere if we keep pretending there isn't an elephant in the room." "Which elephant would that be?" I asked. "There seems to be an entire herd between us." It was meant as a mild joke, but to my surprise, Isadora laughed, a genuine laugh I hadn't heard in months. The sound broke something open between us. "Let's start with the biggest one," she said. "I'm angry with you." I have been for a long time, not just since that night with the painting. That was just the final straw. I nodded, hands clasped tightly around my coffee cup. "I know. Do you?" She leaned forward, eyes intent on mine. "Because I don't think you understand how it felt growing up with a mother who clearly wished I was different, who saw my interests as a phase to outgrow rather than a core part of who I am." "I never wished you were different," I protested. "Mom." Her voice was steady. "You spent my entire childhood trying to turn me into a scientist. Every birthday, every Christmas, microscopes, chemistry sets, anatomy models. Even when I showed no interest, you kept pushing." I wanted to deny it, but memories surfaced unbidden. Isadora's 7th birthday, her face falling as she unwrapped yet another educational toy while her friends received the art supplies she'd asked for. Her science fair projects that I insisted on helping with until they barely reflected her input at all. The brochures for medical summer camps I left casually on her desk throughout high school. "I thought I was encouraging you toward the best path," I said. "A path with security, respect, intellectual fulfillment." "A path like yours," she corrected. "Yes," I admitted. "Like mine." Isadora was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "Did you ever consider that I might find security, respect, and intellectual fulfillment in art?" "Honestly, no." "Why not?" I had to think about that. The reflexive answers, the practicality of medicine, the prestige of science, the statistical likelihood of success felt hollow suddenly. "Because I don't understand art," I finally said. "I never have. It's always seemed subjective and imprecise to me. Science has rules, protocols, measurable outcomes. Art seemed too dependent on opinion, on shifting cultural values. So because you didn't understand it, you decided it wasn't valuable." There was no accusation in her tone, just genuine curiosity. Put that way, my position seemed embarrassingly narrow. I, who had dedicated my life to expanding human knowledge, had dismissed an entire field because it didn't conform to my limited metrics of worth. "I was wrong," I said simply. Isadora looked surprised at my concession. Then she nodded, accepting it. "Your exhibition changed my perspective," I continued. "Not just about your talent, but about art itself. I saw how you were using visual language to explore complex ideas that I explore through research papers and surgical techniques. Different methods, but equally valid." "That's exactly what I've been trying to do," she said, a new animation in her voice. "Use visual means to investigate questions about consciousness, memory, emotional patterns. They're the same questions you ask in your research." For the first time, I let myself truly hear her, to recognize the intellectual rigor behind her artistic choices. We spent the rest of that hour having our first real conversation in years, with Isadora explaining the conceptual frameworks behind her most recent works, and me sharing the questions driving my current research. When we parted that day, something fundamental had shifted. We hadn't resolved all our issues, far from it, but we had established a basic recognition of each other's intellectual worth. It was a modest beginning, but a significant one. Our next meeting moved from the cafe to the university art library, where Isadora showed me books that had influenced her work. The following week, I invited her to my laboratory, where I demonstrated the neural imaging techniques that had inspired some of her paintings. Gradually, our conversations expanded beyond our professional interests to more personal territories. During our 8th weekly meeting, over dinner rather than coffee, Isadora asked the question I'd been dreading. Why did you never come to my art shows before? The real reason. I set down my fork, buying time. The easy answer would be my demanding schedule, the legitimate demands of my profession. But we had moved beyond easy answers. I was afraid, I admitted. Of what? Of not knowing how to respond, of saying the wrong thing, of revealing my ignorance. I traced the rim of my water glass with one finger. In my world, I'm the expert. People seek my opinion, my approval. In your world, I have no authority, no special knowledge. I didn't know how to be just a mother, appreciating her daughter's work without evaluating it. Isadora considered this. So it wasn't that you didn't care, but that you cared too much about appearing knowledgeable. Something like that, I said. Though that doesn't excuse it, I let my pride keep me from supporting you. It wasn't just the missed shows, she said quietly. It was all the dismissive comments over the years, referring to my studies as playing with paint, asking when I was going to get serious about my future, introducing me to your colleagues as still figuring things out even after I'd chosen my major. Each example landed like a physical blow. I had no defense against the truth of her words. I'm sorry, I said, the phrase still awkward on my tongue. I was wrong, not just about your talent, but about the validity of your choice. You chose a path that was right for you, and I couldn't see it because it wasn't the path I would have chosen. Isadora nodded, accepting the apology without immediately offering forgiveness. It was fair. Trust would need to be rebuilt gradually, through consistent action rather than words. After that conversation, I began educating myself about art in earnest. Not just to understand Isadora's work, but to address my own ignorance about a field I had dismissed for decades. I started with the basics, reading introductory texts on art history and theory. I visited museums I had walked past for years without entering. I attended lectures in the university's art department, sitting quietly in the back row, taking notes as diligently as any undergraduate. My colleagues noticed the change in my interests. Dr. Kapoor found me in the faculty lounge one afternoon, reading a book on contemporary painting techniques. Branching out from neuroscience, Callista? He asked, indicating the book. Trying to understand my daughter's world, I replied. He sat down across from me. How is that going? Humbling, I admitted. I've discovered that art history is as complex and rigorous as medical history, just with different parameters. I've been embarrassingly ignorant. We're all ignorant outside our specialties, he said kindly. That's why we specialize. Perhaps, I said, but I made the mistake of confusing my specialty with superiority. I assumed that because I understood neuroscience, my intellectual approach was more valid than artistic approaches to understanding human experience. Dr. Kapoor considered this. Do you know what I admire most about you, Callista? Your commitment to evidence. When the data contradicts your hypothesis, you adjust your thinking. You're doing the same thing now, just in a different domain. His perspective helped me reframe my efforts. I was conducting research into a field I had previously neglected, following the evidence toward a more complete understanding. It was actually quite consistent with my scientific approach to life. 1 month after our dinner conversation, I attended a panel discussion at the University Art Museum. The topic was Science and Art, Intersecting Visions, and Isadora was one of the featured speakers. I sat in the middle of the audience, not wanting to distract her with my presence but unwilling to hide in the back. When she took the podium, she spoke with a confidence and clarity that reminded me unexpectedly of myself. She articulated the connections between scientific inquiry and artistic exploration, using examples from her own work and from historical intersections between the fields. She was authoritative without being condescending, passionate without being imprecise. During the question period, a man in the audience asked about her influences. "My mother is a neuroscientist," she said without hesitation. Her work on neural plasticity, how the brain forms new pathways after injury, profoundly influenced my thinking about transformation and adaptation in my own work. I felt a tightness in my throat at her words, at this public acknowledgement of my influence despite our difficult history. After the panel, I waited in the reception area while Isadora was surrounded by admirers and questioners. When the crowd finally thinned, she made her way to where I stood. "You were remarkable," I told her. Clear, articulate, genuinely insightful about the interconnections between disciplines. "High praise coming from you," she said, but there was warmth in her voice rather than irony. "I meant what I said about the influence of your work on neural plasticity," she continued. "I've been thinking about it since undergraduate, how the brain's ability to forge new connections mirrors the artistic process of finding unexpected relationships between forms and ideas. I never made that connection," I admitted. "But it makes perfect sense. I tried to tell you about it years ago," she said, "but you weren't really listening then." "I'm listening now," I said, something softened in her expression. "Yes, you are." As spring arrived in Boston, bringing a welcome thaw after the long winter, I found myself thinking more deeply about the parallels between neural plasticity and our gradually healing relationship. In my research, I had documented the painstaking way damaged brains create new neural pathways. First tentative connections, then gradually strengthened through repetition and use, until what was once impossible becomes natural again. Isadora and I were in that process now, establishing new patterns of interaction, reinforcing them through regular contact, gradually building something that felt not like our old relationship, but like something new and potentially stronger. One afternoon in late April, Isadora invited me to her studio, a converted warehouse space she shared with 3 other artists. It was my first visit to her workplace, and I felt the significance of the invitation. The studio was a revelation. While I had seen Isadora's finished paintings in the gallery, I had never witnessed her process. Her workspace was meticulously organized, with labeled containers of paints and mediums, reference materials neatly arranged, works in progress systematically displayed. It reminded me unexpectedly of my own laboratory, a space designed for serious inquiry. "I didn't expect it to be so orderly," I admitted. Isadora smiled. "Everyone says that. They expect paint splattered everywhere in chaos. But I work methodically. I always have. Like mother, like daughter." The thought came unbidden, but I welcomed it. She showed me her current project, a series exploring how traumatic experiences alter neural architecture. The canvases were darker than her previous work, with fractured patterns and dissonant color relationships. "These are different," I observed. "I'm pushing beyond the neuroscience I understand into the neuroscience I don't," she explained. "How trauma physically reshapes the brain, creating both damage and sometimes unexpected resilience." As she spoke, gesturing to various elements in the paintings, I recognized a familiar passion, the same excitement I felt when pursuing a new research question. Isadora might be using brushes instead of scalpels, but her fundamental approach was one I understood intimately. The methodical investigation of complex systems, the search for patterns within apparent chaos, the drive to make the invisible visible. "I'm applying for a residency program," she told me as we sat among her works in progress. "It's at a medical research center in Chicago. They bring artists and scientists together to collaborate on projects that bridge disciplines." "That sounds perfect for you," I said. "It's highly competitive. Only 2 artists are selected each year." I could hear the mixture of hope and anxiety in her voice, so familiar from my own early career when applying for prestigious fellowships. "They would be fortunate to have you," I said with conviction. Your work already demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of scientific concepts, and you have the rare ability to translate between visual and scientific languages. She looked at me with surprise. You really think so? I know so, I said firmly. Your integration of neuroscientific principles into your visual vocabulary is genuinely innovative. And more importantly, it makes complex ideas accessible to non-scientific audiences in ways traditional academic papers never could. Isadora blinked rapidly, and I realized with a start that my daughter was fighting tears. I had spent decades offering her criticism, correction, and conditional praise tied to achievements I valued. Simple, straightforward validation of her chosen path was apparently still unexpected enough to move her deeply. Would you? She began, then hesitated. Would you be willing to write a letter of recommendation? They require one from a scientific professional, and your name would carry weight. Of course, I said immediately. I would be honored. But as I considered her request more fully, I realized it required something of me I had never offered before: a public, professional endorsement of her artistic path. Not just private acknowledgement between us, but a formal statement that would link my scientific reputation to her artistic career. I want to write more than a standard recommendation, I said. I want to specifically address how your work contributes to scientific discourse in ways traditional research cannot. Would that be helpful? The smile that spread across her face was answer enough. That evening, I sat at my desk until well past midnight, crafting the most important letter I had ever written. I described Isidora's work with the same precision and analytic rigor I would use for a promising medical researcher. I detailed how her visual explorations of neural architecture offered new perspectives on questions that had occupied my own research for decades. I affirmed, without qualification, the intellectual and social value of her artistic contributions. When I finished, I read it through twice, checking for any hint of the condescension or faint praise that had characterized my previous assessments of her work. Finding none, I signed it with my full academic title and credentials, lending the full weight of my professional standing to her application. As I sealed the envelope, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my understanding not just of Isadora, but of myself. For decades, I had defined intelligence and achievement narrowly, dismissing paths that diverged from my empirical, analytical worldview. Doing so, I had not only damaged my relationship with my daughter, but had limited my own intellectual growth. By attempting to understand Isidora's work on its own terms, I had expanded my conception of how knowledge can be pursued and expressed. The boundary I had maintained between science and art, between my world and hers, was not just unnecessary but actively harmful to the pursuit of deeper understanding. I emailed Isadora the next morning, letting her know the letter was complete. Her response came quickly. "Thank you. This means everything." 4 simple words that carried the weight of years of missed connection and newfound recognition. We still had far to go in rebuilding our relationship, but the foundation was finally solid. Isadora received the residency in Chicago. The news came on a windy March day, delivered via a phone call I was fortunate enough to witness as we shared lunch in my office. I watched her face transform with shock, then joy, then a flutter of uncertainty as she glanced at me. "Yes, I can start in September," she said into the phone, her eyes still on mine. "Thank you for this opportunity. I'm honored to be selected." When she hung up, I didn't wait for her to speak. "Congratulations," I said firmly. "This is exactly what you deserve." "It's in Chicago," she said, as if testing my reaction. "I'm aware of the geography," I replied with a small smile. "Chicago has excellent direct flights from Boston." Relief washed over her face. "So you're not upset about me leaving?" The question revealed how much damage remained to be repaired between us. She still expected me to prioritize my convenience over her growth. "Isadora, this is a prestigious opportunity perfectly aligned with your artistic vision," I said. "I would never want you to decline it for my sake. Besides, I have accumulated approximately 3 decades of unused vacation time." The medical school will likely throw a party when I finally submit a request to use some of it. She laughed, but her eyes remained serious. Are you sure? Because 6 months is a long time. I'm positive, I said. And perhaps the distance will be good for us. We've made progress, but we're still finding our way. Sometimes separation creates clarity, she nodded slowly. That makes sense. Speaking of clarity, there's something I want to ask you. I waited while she gathered her thoughts, noting how she twisted her napkin in the same way she had as a child when nervous. The residency involves a major exhibition at the end, she explained. Each artist collaborates with scientists at the institute to create work bridging our disciplines. I've been thinking about proposing a project that would involve you. I set down my fork, surprised. Me? It would be about memory formation and emotional processing, she continued. Using your research as a foundation, but exploring it through artistic means. We could work together remotely at first, then you could come to Chicago toward the end of the residency to finalize the installation. You want us to collaborate professionally? I clarified, wanting to be certain I understood what she was proposing. Yes, she said simply. Is that something you'd consider? The old Callista would have hesitated, would have worried about how such an unorthodox project might be perceived by my scientific colleagues. But I was no longer that person, or at least, I was working diligently not to be. I would be honored, I said. Though I should warn you, my artistic skills are limited to precisely rendered anatomical drawings. I'm not asking you to paint, she said, a smile breaking through her serious expression. I'm asking you to think with me, to bring your scientific perspective to my visual exploration. We'd be combining our strengths, not trying to work in each other's mediums. Then absolutely yes, I said. Tell me what you need from me to get started. Over the next months, as Isadora prepared for her move to Chicago, we began laying the groundwork for our collaboration. We established a shared digital workspace where I uploaded research papers, brain scans, and laboratory notes related to memory formation and emotional processing. Isadora responded with sketches, conceptual frameworks, and visual references that translated these scientific concepts into artistic language. Our weekly coffee meetings became working sessions, with sketchbooks and journal articles spread across cafe tables, as we developed a shared vocabulary that bridged our disciplines. For the first time, I found myself thinking about my research from an entirely new perspective, seeing patterns and connections that had never been apparent through a purely analytical lens. What if we focus on how emotional memories physically alter neural architecture? Isadora suggested during one session. Your papers mention that emotionally charged memories create stronger, more persistent neural pathways. I could visualize that through layered materials that change opacity over time. We could incorporate actual fMRI data, I offered, warming to the idea. I have longitudinal scans showing how emotional memory pathways evolve over months and years. That's perfect, she said, already sketching. We could create a time-based installation that physically represents those changes, allowing viewers to experience the transformation visually. As summer progressed, our collaboration deepened. Isadora moved to Chicago in late August, but our work continued through video calls and shared digital files. The geographical distance, rather than hindering our connection, seemed to create a productive space for each of us to process our evolving relationship alongside our creative work. In October, I flew to Chicago for my first visit to the Research Institute where Isadora was in residence. The facility was impressive, a modern complex where artistic studios sat alongside scientific laboratories, with common areas deliberately designed to foster interdisciplinary exchange. Isadora met me at the entrance, professional and poised in a way that reminded me she was no longer the wounded young woman who had walked out of my condo nearly a year ago. She was a recognized artist now, confidently navigating a prestigious institution. Welcome to my world, she said, leading me through security. Or should I say our world now? She showed me the spacious studio she'd been assigned, where our collaborative project was beginning to take physical form. Large translucent panels hung from the ceiling, layered with what appeared to be neural mapping patterns in various stages of formation. Beneath them, a complex arrangement of lights was programmed to change in sequence, illuminating different pathways through the panels over time. "This is just the prototype," she explained. "The final installation will be much larger, with 27 panels representing different stages of memory consolidation. The lighting sequence is based on your temporal mapping data." I walked slowly around the installation, seeing my research transformed. What had been abstract data points and statistical analyses in my papers had become a visceral, spatial experience. Viewers would literally walk through the process of memory formation, experiencing with their bodies what I had spent decades studying in the laboratory. "It's extraordinary," I said, genuinely awed. "You've made the invisible visible." "That's what art does," she said simply. "And what science does too, in its own way. We're both trying to reveal what's hidden from ordinary perception." Over the next 3 days, we worked together refining the installation concept. I met with the neuroscientists at the institute who were partnering with Isadora, impressed by their enthusiasm for this interdisciplinary approach. One of them, Dr. Alina Chen, pulled me aside after a particularly productive meeting. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said. "We've had artists in residence before, but none who could engage with the scientific concepts at such a sophisticated level. You must be proud." "I am," I said, the words coming easily now. "Though I can't take credit for her talents. Those are entirely her own." Dr. Chen gave me a knowing look. "I wouldn't be so sure. The way she thinks, her methodical approach to creative problems, her ability to synthesize complex information, those qualities remind me of someone else I've just met." I hadn't considered that Isadora might have inherited not just my appearance but my cognitive patterns, expressed through a different medium. The thought created a strange warmth in my chest. That evening, Isadora and I had dinner at a small restaurant near her temporary apartment. Away from the institute, relaxed by good food and a glass of wine, our conversation drifted from our project to more personal territory. "The scientists here seem impressed with your work," I observed. "They were skeptical at first," she admitted. "Artists who work with scientific concepts often simplify them to the point of inaccuracy." I had to prove I understood the actual mechanisms before they took me seriously. "Yet another way we're alike," I said. "I've spent my entire career proving I belong in rooms where people don't expect to see someone who looks like me." Isadora paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "I never thought about that." "About what?" "About how hard it must have been for you, being a woman of color in neurosurgery, especially when you were starting out." She set down her fork. "I've been so focused on how you didn't understand my world that I never considered what it took for you to succeed in yours. It was a perspective I hadn't expected." "The challenges were substantial," I acknowledged, "but not relevant to how I treated your choices." "Maybe they were, though," she said thoughtfully. "You fought so hard for your place in science. You knew exactly how difficult that path was, but you also knew it was possible because you'd done it. Maybe art seemed not just impractical but unnecessarily risky when there was a path you'd already cleared." Her insight startled me. I had never connected my insistence on Isadora following my career path with my own struggles to establish it. But she was right. Having carved a place for myself in a challenging field, I had wanted to offer her that hard-won territory rather than watching her start from scratch in an area where I had no map to provide. "That doesn't excuse my dismissiveness," I said. "But yes, there may be some truth in that analysis." "I'm not excusing it either," she clarified. "Just understanding it better." We were quiet for a moment, each absorbing this new perspective on our shared history. "I have something to show you," she said finally, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small sketchbook and handed it to me. "I found this when I was packing for the move." I opened it carefully. Inside were drawings from Isadora's childhood, precise, detailed renderings of the human brain, neurons, cellular structures. They were surprisingly accurate for a child's work. I used to sneak into your home office and copy the illustrations from your medical textbooks, she explained. I was fascinated by your world, by the structures you studied. I wanted to understand what captivated you so completely. I turned the pages slowly, seeing evidence of a connection I had completely missed, my daughter reaching across the divide between us years before I was willing to do the same. Why didn't you ever show me these? I asked. I tried once, she said. You were preparing for a major surgery, reviewing scans in your office. I brought the sketchbook to show you, but you were so focused that you just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey," without really looking. So I stopped trying. The memory hit me with physical force, not that specific incident, which was lost among countless similar moments, but the pattern it represented. How many times had Isadora reached toward me only to be met with distraction or dismissal? "I'm sorry," I said, the words still unfamiliar but increasingly necessary. "I miss so much." "We both did," she said gently. When I returned to Boston after that visit, something had fundamentally shifted in our relationship. Our weekly video calls now had dual purpose, discussing our creative collaboration and genuinely catching up on each other's lives. I found myself sharing professional challenges I would previously have kept private, while Isadora spoke openly about her struggles adapting to the competitive environment of the residency program. Over the next months, our installation project evolved significantly. What had begun as a visualization of memory formation expanded to include elements about the transmission of knowledge and patterns between generations, a reflection of our own evolving understanding of each other. In February, I returned to Chicago for the final stages of the installation. The Research Institute had allocated their largest exhibition space for our project, recognizing its ambition and scope. Isadora and I worked side by side for 10 days, adjusting the complex arrangement of panels, refining the lighting sequences, writing the accompanying text that would guide visitors through the experience. The night before the opening, we stayed late at the Institute, making final adjustments to the installation. The large space was quiet, most staff having departed hours earlier. We worked in comfortable silence, communicating with gestures and brief questions that required no elaboration, a synchronicity I had previously experienced only with longtime surgical teammates. As we stepped back to evaluate our work, Isadora asked, "What do you think? Is it finished?" I surveyed the installation, now fully realized. Visitors would enter through a corridor where MRI scans of brain activity gradually transformed into abstract patterns of light and color. As they moved through the space, these patterns would become more complex, more interconnected, representing how memories strengthen and evolve over time. The final chamber contained a mirrored element that reflected both the visitor and the accumulated patterns, symbolizing how memories become part of our identity. "It's complete," I said, feeling a sense of accomplishment that differed from but equaled what I experienced after a successful surgery. "It communicates exactly what we intended." Which is, that memory isn't just storage, it's transformation. Each recollection changes what's remembered, integrating new understanding. Nothing stays fixed. I looked at her. "Rather like our relationship." She smiled, recognizing the parallel. "We should come up with a title." "What about neural inheritance?" I suggested. "It captures both the scientific process and the personal element." "Perfect," she agreed. Dr. Callista Vendrell and Isadora Vendrell, Neural Inheritance. The exhibition opening the next evening drew a capacity crowd: scientists, artists, students, and press. Isadora and I stood together at the entrance, greeting visitors as they arrived. Several of my colleagues from Boston had flown in for the event, including Dr. Kapoor, who seemed genuinely impressed by the integration of scientific concepts into an artistic framework. "You've expanded your research into entirely new territory, Callista," he said, surveying the installation. "This represents a breakthrough in how we can communicate complex neurological concepts to the public." "The breakthrough is Isadora's," I corrected. "I merely provided the data. She transformed it into experience." Midway through the evening, the institute director called for everyone's attention. After praising the exhibition, she invited Isadora and me to offer some remarks about our collaboration. Isadora spoke first, explaining the conceptual framework of the installation and acknowledging the scientists who had supported the project. Then she turned to me. "None of this would exist without my mother, Dr. Callista Vendrell," she said, her voice steady but emotional. "Not just because her research provided the scientific foundation, but because she taught me without intending to, that boundaries between disciplines are artificial constructs, that the pursuit of understanding takes many forms." It just took us both a while to recognize that truth. When it was my turn to speak, I found myself momentarily without words, an unusual experience for someone accustomed to lecturing to hundreds of medical students. I looked out at the crowd, then at our installation, then at my daughter standing tall and confident beside me. Throughout my career, I've studied how the brain creates new neural pathways after injury. I began. What I've learned through this collaboration is that the same principle applies to understanding itself. When old pathways of thinking prove inadequate, we must have the courage to forge new ones. Isadora taught me that art isn't separate from science but parallel to it, another way of investigating the same fundamental questions about human experience. After the speeches, as guests explored the installation, Isadora and I stood together in the final chamber, watching people engage with our work. Many lingered before the mirrored element, seeing themselves reflected amid the patterns of memory and connection we had created. "What happens after the residency ends?" I asked, the question that had been hovering unspoken between us for months. "I've had some offers," she said. "Galleries in New York, teaching positions at a couple of universities." "All well-deserved," I said, trying to keep my personal hopes from influencing her professional decisions. "There's also a 2-year fellowship at the Boston Institute for Arts and Sciences," she continued, watching my face carefully. "They're establishing an interdisciplinary program focused exactly on this kind of work, bridging scientific research and artistic practice." "In Boston," I repeated, not wanting to presume anything. "Yes," she said. "I'd have a studio at the institute but would need my own living space. I was thinking maybe that apartment building near your condo. The one with the good natural light. That would be convenient for future collaborations," I said, matching her careful tone. "And for Sunday dinners," she added with a small smile. "Those too." A comfortable silence fell between us as we watched a young couple move through our installation, pointing out details to each other, their faces illuminated by the shifting lights. "I'm proud of you, Isadora," I said finally. "Not because you've succeeded by external metrics, though you certainly have. I'm proud of who you are, your integrity, your vision, your determination to forge your own path even when I made that difficult." She turned to me, her eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, that means everything coming from you." Later that night, after all the guests had departed and we were gathering our belongings to leave, Isadora paused before the entrance to our installation. "We should document this," she said, pulling out her phone. "Stand there in front of the title wall." I moved into position, feeling uncharacteristically self-conscious. "Just me?" "No," she said, setting a timer on her phone camera and hurrying to join me. "Both of us together." The camera flashed, capturing the moment. Dr. Callista Vendrell and Isadora Vendrell standing side by side before their joint creation, Neural Inheritance. Mother and daughter, scientist and artist, two brilliances no longer separated by misunderstanding, but united in mutual respect. As we left the darkened gallery, I thought about the title we had chosen, Neural Inheritance. It referred to the scientific process of memory formation our installation explored, but it captured something more personal as well. What we inherit from our parents isn't just genetic material but patterns of thought, ways of seeing, approaches to understanding the world. Isadora had inherited my analytical mind, my drive for precision, my relentless curiosity, qualities I had failed to recognize because they were expressed through a different medium. And I, somewhat later in life, had inherited something from her. The courage to expand my definition of what constitutes meaningful work, meaningful inquiry, meaningful connection. To see beyond the boundaries of my own discipline toward a more integrated understanding. Outside, the February night was cold but clear, stars visible despite the city lights. Isadora linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the waiting taxi, a gesture that would have been unimaginable a year ago. So, she said, what should we collaborate on next?